I don't know. I don't know that one is better than the other. I think it's all kind of cyclical. Like a lot of people do rant about the whole microtransaction model for games, but that was what drove the arcade market. Arcades were all about microtransactions with choke points. There are points built into games to hopefully make you lose a quarter so that you would feed the quarter into the machine. If you ever played any of those side-scrolling beat-em-ups, they weren't as much fun to play on the home console because you can just burn right through it, and there's no cost to it. And when you get those choke points, you can just kind of keep burning through it until you got there. But with the coin op stuff, there's a reason for them. And so I think some of that's coming back.
The Atari came out in 1977, the Atari 2600, and from there the market got saturated with consoles until, in 1983 there were a huge number of consoles out and nobody had all of them, and just really crappy games. And then the video game market crashed in 1984, and most of those consoles went down the drain. But Nintendo brought it back in '85 with the NES. And that kind of started the rise of consoles that we see today. Arcades kind of went through the same thing where there was market saturation because the games were making so much money and everybody wanted them. And then they crashed because people, they had to invest the couple $1,000s in the cabinet, and eventually people stopped putting as many quarters in them. But that market never really came back because with the rise of the home console, people could pay up front and play as much as they wanted, sometimes for 50, 100 hours or more.
All right. Thank you.
I think they're just like all these people who traditionally weren't what we would call a gamer, who are now active but casual consumers of game stuff, and it has a big effect on the industry.
So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in games, especially the social interaction. To watch someone play a video game was like laying face down on concrete. I mean, you're watching somebody going like this. What fun is that? You go down there and you can laugh. You have a real good belly laugh watching these people try to coordinate and try to sing and try to play these musical instruments and everything else. So it becomes as much fun to watch people play the game as it is to play the game. Well, that makes it a much more social thing. So I think all that is really, really terrific.
There's been this switch from games as a product, where you made a game, you shipped a game, you were done, to games as a service, where you make a game, but shipping is the beginning of the relationship with the game. So the nature of I think the industry and where we're putting money is kind of swapped around a whole bunch.
One of my first memories is when my family bought a Sega Genesis. I think I was like 3. That's like one of the earliest things I remember, is going home and playing that. And I had a Super when I was younger. I still have the same Super. I still have a Sega. I kind of collect. I mean, I mainly just kind of buy what I think is good and what I want. But the mall, my local mall, when I was growing up, had an arcade called Aladdin's Castle. And I had like it had some ticket games, but it had a lot of it had stuff like Time Crisis, like House of the Dead, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Street Fighters, like shooters, stuff like that. So yeah. I'd say anything that puts arcade machines in the hands of people and allows them to play them is a good thing. So yeah, it's a good thing. We get more of a more dedicated crowd more often than not. We get more collectors or people that have been playing games since they can remember. I would say come in here more than the general clientele that would just go to GameStop or a Best Buy. There's been people that are 6 or 7 years old and they come in and they buy a Super Nintendo and they're super excited to play all the old stuff. Arcades definitely, compared to where they were at like in the 80s or 90s, they're nowhere near as prevalent. The arcade doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, I like to see more arcades personally. I don't think they fit. It's definitely not as profitable, and it comes from a different like perspective. You have to go into it making a different game, definitely. Like that like an RPG isn't going to fit into that. Something that someone has to remember a story really won't just generally fit into that. Anything that someone has to like play for an hour to like get into is not going to work. It has to be fun and quick, and you have to be able to pick it up really quickly. It has to be simple, something like that.
If you're able to look back on some of those old games, you're able to see what we have right now with a bigger perspective.
Playing arcade games and knowing how people went about making those kinds of old games is really important, because you can look at it and say like this simple mechanic, how I play, how I like run across the screen, I jump or I punch or something, makes really intuitive sense, and it feels really good in this game. That's why this game is still played now, why there's still copies that work, because people keep fixing them. Like, how did they get that right game feel into that? How did they fine tune that mechanic? Like, that's really important. That's important for any game. Like, every mechanic should feel that way.
I think one of the things that it can teach you, by looking at some of those old games and realizing that you couldn't put them down, you couldn't stop playing them. Asteroids, I mean, shit. What was Asteroids? I mean, it was vector graphics in 2D on the screen, and I played it for hours, okay? And it didn't have all the graphics. It didn't have all the, one thing exploding after another, but yet they were fun. But yet that you couldn't stop playing them. And so that's the essence of what games are all about. And I think that in some instances, the designers have depended a little too much on, the whiz-bang. And we could get back to basics, because it doesn't have to have all those whiz-bangs to be a good game, to be fun.